about Dr. Higginbotham. He is a professor in the Human Development and Family Studies Department. He also serves as Associate Vice President for USU Extension. Together with his colleagues and students, he has published over 100 articles on family process and family life education. He is a licensed marriage and family therapist and has served as an LDS bishop. He has been married for 25 years and has 5 children. So with that, we'd like to welcome Dr. Brian Higginbotham.
Okay, it's great to be here. I was here last year too, and it's just so exciting to see so many people come back and have new faces here as well. So Esterly gave me a big assignment to cover a whole bunch of different things, and it's probably going to take us the full amount, so we're going to jump right in. In terms of learning objectives, she wanted me to touch on why marriages may get stuck or stale, how to navigate the challenges that come when you find somebody in that situation, whether it's yourself or whether it's a loved one or somebody in your congregation. And talk a little bit about some of the research around kids' development in homes where their parents may be in a stale or stuck marriage, as well as some of the impacts on divorce, as well as some resources that might help you in your own personal relationship or with those that you may serve. So we'll see if we can get to all of that. I do hope that today is an interactive and discussion-filled presentation. One of the things that I've learned over the years is how little I know, and I enjoy presenting because of the opportunities to learn from those that are in the audience. So please, when I ask for answers or ideas or thoughts, don't be shy, speak out, and away we go. So to begin with, how does bread get stale? Shout it out. How does bread get stale? You leave it out. Anything else? Air, just the natural, it gets old. All right. How about a stuck truck? How does a truck go from sitting nicely in your garage, protected, to being stuck in the mud? Tell me that process. Bad choices, okay. Going in maybe a wrong direction. What else? Peer pressure. Any other thoughts about what gets a truck stuck? A bad driver? The environment. Yeah. All right. So let's talk for a minute. I'm going to ask you guys to engage in a little activity here. This is an analogy. What about stale bread or stuck trucks can teach us about stale and stuck marriages? So again, shout it out. What principles did you just say also apply to marriages that may feel stale or stuck? Any thoughts? Yeah. Okay, not protecting, not maybe giving it the attention that it needs. Okay, what else?
The husband got you into both of them. He left the bread unwrapped up.
It's usually his fault, isn't it? Yeah, either way.
How many would think the woman was driving that truck?
Touche. What else? What are the other parallels that one can derive from stale bread, stuck trucks, and stale marriages? Want to say that a little bit louder? I don't know if people in the back heard you. Spinning your wheels. Yeah, a lot of people who feel stuck in marriages, it's because, they got the pedal on the gas. They think that they're trying, but what they're trying isn't getting them anywhere. Maybe it's a cycle, maybe it's a conflict resolution strategy or the lack thereof, that they feel like they're putting in the effort, but they're not going anywhere. All right, let's talk about another analogy. This is a faith summit, so let's give a Judeo-Christian analogy. The Israelites were stuck in Egypt for how many years? According to Exodus, around 430. Now, you think your marriage is long. 430 years being in captivity. Characterize for me that relationship that the Israelites had with the Egyptians. Shout out. What are some of the characteristics of that dynamic? They were enslaved. They felt like enslaved. They physically were slaves.
It started out good.
It started out good. Yeah, I mean, they came down to get some food, and they kind of ended up getting stuck, right? What else? They were codependent. Yeah, they really didn't know how to leave. And if they did leave, how would they provide for themselves? Good. Anything else about that stuck relationship? Hopeless. You do feel hopeless when you're in a long-term stuck relationship. They get divorced from Egypt, right? They're able to separate themselves, and they leave, and they are free. They don't have that same oppression. They don't have the same demands, physically or emotionally, from this partner that they call Egypt. They're free. But what ends up happening? For 40 years, you could say that they were kind of stale. So tell me about those 40 years. What was going on in those 40 years that kind of prevented them from achieving, the promised land and the joy and the kind of finality that they were looking for?
Walking in circles, compass.
Yeah, they kind of lacked compass, direction, weren't ready for a change. Interesting. Other thoughts?
It adopted so many of the Egyptian worship things that it was really difficult for them to get away from that.
Yeah.
And other things like that. That was really hard for them to accept about it. Although God, the gender, really grown up with that.
It's what they knew, right? They
All the time.
Yeah, I mean, they incorporated those kind of behaviors, traditions. They didn't have a marriage enrichment class or any kind of, AI tool that was going to teach them how to do things differently. They were truly stuck. Okay, so again, what does this story, in terms of an analogy, what does it teach us about marriages, stale and stuck marriages? Anyone see any parallels? Stale and stuck marriage often feels like you're walking in circles. You're moving, but you don't really feel like you're getting anywhere, does it? Yeah. Other thoughts, other parallels? Please.
I like the reminder of like the importance of change. Like you do have to change in order to grow, in order to get where you're going.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
It reminds me like the Israelites didn't think they could leave, but you can leave. They could have left at any time or escaped or ran. I don't know how it would have looked for them, but I think sometimes we feel so stuck.
We kind of close ourselves off to some options, maybe?
So we always do have a choice. Is how I kind of look at it.
Okay. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, yeah, I think it's fairly obvious to most of us what leads to a stale or stuck marriage, right? We either stop giving attention to the things that we do, or we end up giving too much attention to things that we probably shouldn't. And we end up focusing on particular behaviors that aren't getting anywhere rather than changing or adapting and trying to go in a different direction. And so it's easy to identify, and sometimes it's fairly common to feel that you're in a stale or stuck marriage. The harder question in my mind is, what do you do to get out of it? And as I've studied this and go to conferences and listen to people who study this, there tends to be some pretty common principles. And my guess is that you know what those principles are. And so we're going to have another little activity here. And I want you to turn to the person on your left, and I want you to try to pull some of these, what I consider to be universal principles about helping things grow, helping things nourish, helping things blossom. And again, the analogy here, of course, is with a marriage, but sometimes it's easier to identify what that might look like in another context and then apply it rather than looking in a relationship that maybe you're closed off or blinded or not feeling where to go. So in terms of gardening or cooking, what are some of the principles that make a really, really good garden, a flourishing garden, and a really good tasty meal? Turn to the person on your left and see if you can come up with 2 or 3 principles. All right, time out. We don't have time to hear from everybody, but if your partner said something really, really wise, like you're like, wow, everybody needs to hear, that's a really good principle. Raise your hand, let's hear some of those. About 4 or 5 of them. Yes.
So if you're cooking and the recipe doesn't turn out, it doesn't mean you're never going to eat again.
That's deep. That's good. Let's hear another one, please.
This is from my wife. She said it, but I know she won't want to say it. But we have a garden, and we didn't do anything with it. And we still got some produce and things at the end, but we got a lot of stuff we didn't want. So if we would have given it a little bit of attention, like we would have gotten a lot more production, more yield, and more probably happiness, honestly.
Very good. Couple more. What makes for a really good recipe? Some spice. Yeah. Anyone eat, like my son in college eats cereal every single day? I mean, it kind of gets boring. You got to spice it up a little bit. One more. Any other wise thought? Yeah.
The ingredients you enjoy. If I don't like the ingredients, I'm probably not going to like the answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why would you want to plant asparagus?
All right, now to the person on your right, have a conversation about what does it take to have a really strong, robust investment portfolio or a really healthy body? What are some of the principles that you put into those kinds of activities that we could draw analogies to a marriage relationship? Go. All right, let's come to order. Okay, so again, I want to hear about 3 or 4 principles of growing your portfolio financially and also having the kind of healthy body that you aspire to. What are some of the behaviors? What are some of the mindsets? What are some of the principles that you put into those that we can draw some analogies to marriage? Please.
Make bigger investments when it's down.
That was good. Yeah, buy low.
You need to diversify your portfolio. You need to have a lot of different interests involved, not just one focus.
Yeah, very good. Some consistency in those investments. Yeah, I mean, you can't just get healthy overnight, right? You can't just go to the gym once. Very good.
You have to ride the highs and lows.
There's going to be highs and lows, isn't there? Yeah, there's some days I just don't feel like running, right? Actually, most days I don't feel like running. But you kind of have to push through those days if you want to stay healthy. Did I see a hand back there?
She said the same thing. Just the highs and lows, like in your portfolio. Sometimes it's going to be high, and so much is everybody's going to fluctuate. So I think your marriage is sometimes maybe doing really great, maybe not, but you're just going to ride that out because of the trajectory.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Whether you're talking about gardening or finances or cooking or marriage, there tends to be a couple of kind of key principles that most therapists are going to walk you through if you go into counseling. If you go to a relationship enhancement seminar, they're going to cover these same principles. They may cover them with slightly different terms. But let's just walk through some of them. And if you've got some examples of how these particular principles have been utilized in relationships that you admire, or even ones that maybe you're worried about, but you think, if only they would do this, please shout out and let's help each other learn how we can apply these principles. The first one is simplicity, particularly when it comes to things like investing. Most of us don't have just this huge windfall of money that we can put in. It requires discipline, like those who pay tithing, to put 5% or 10% on a regular basis. Same thing with exercise. It's the small things that ultimately build up that muscle mass and capacity in our endurance. And so the core principle here is that there has to be effort. And so for individuals who are feeling stale and stuck, in many cases, there's quite honestly a lack of sincere effort. They're kind of going through the motions. And in many cases, you can try to get people out of those stale and stuck moments, or yourself, by simply exerting a little bit more effort in some area. But often it's the thought that it has to be something big. We have to go to counseling, or we need to go on a big trip, or we need to do something huge that's going to cost money or time, keeps us from doing anything. And so think about little things that you can do to kind of spice things up. For example, I know a lot of people who just make sure that they have an opportunity to connect with their partner at the end of the day, or sometimes it's at the beginning of the day, because that's the only time that they can make it work with their crazy schedules and carpool routines. If that doesn't work, pillow talk, but making sure that there is an opportunity to connect every single day. Some couples will pray together. Others, this is my brother-in-law. We were talking about this at a camp out, and he says, what you got to do is when you get home from work, and he's a CPA, so he's at work a lot, you put the kids to bed and you just grill steaks. That's the secret of a strong marriage. Now, the funny thing is, I then asked his wife if that's true, and she said, no, the tip to being happy in marriage is not to marry a CPA. So maybe they need to grill some more steaks together. I don't know. But you tell me, what are some other simple ways that you have seen, either in your own relationship or in other relationships, simple things that people have done to keep a connection and to keep a growth, to keep that relationship feeling like it's growing rather than feeling stale or stuck? Anyone willing to share? Please.
I haven't made it there yet, but my friend says that she and her husband rub each other's feet while they read the new book together. Call it. That's very cool.
That is cool. My wife would love that. Yeah. Did I hear another hand here?
Oh, yeah, I just think like regular appreciation.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. It doesn't cost anything. Yeah, very good. Please.
Sometimes it's hard, but it's quite simple, really. It's just to not have to be right. Just kind of realize, like, maybe not be right. So you just let it go.
Very good. Yeah.
I heard this, I think it was from David Schramm, that he said that for 5 minutes before you go to bed at night, tell each other what you love about each other. But we simplified that, and my husband and I have been doing it where we just tell each other one thing every night. We hug each other and say, this is something I love about you, or I love that you did today. And it has been really cool because I find myself thinking about it during the day. What am I going to say tonight to him? So I'm looking for the good. It's just that simple little thing that I really love it.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
I was just gonna say checking in throughout the day, just sending texts. My husband will tell me he got to work, or we'll send funny memes to each other throughout the day. Just kind of those little connections all throughout the day.
Yeah, I am so bad at that. I get into my, my mode at work, and I'm busy with this, and yeah, just those simple little bids could make a big difference. Thank you. A couple of you kind of touched on the second core principle, and that is consistency. Again, just like with athletics or health, your own health, taking care of a garden, you can't just plant and go away and think that 6 months later everything's going to be dandy. There's got to be this consistency of effort. And so one of the things that was shared is every night this couple is, saying something that they appreciate or admire about that person. Well, just the mere act of having that be a routine causes you to think about your partner during the day, so you can be prepared for what you're going to say that night, right? And so there's something about consistency that is really, really helpful. From a scriptural perspective, the children of Israel had to learn this principle themselves. Every day they had to go gather manna. And what happens if they didn't? What happened to the manna? It was infested by worms, right? By the next morning. If they didn't gather new ones. So examples of little things you might consider, and then I'd love to hear some examples that you have seen. Daily prayer, whether that be together as a family or as a couple, before you go to bed, before you go to work. Scheduled activities. This may sound a little controversial, but I have a colleague who swears on scheduling sex. And in her relationship, and she advocates it for her clients, the act of defining that Wednesday nights is our night. It takes the uncertainty about whether there's going to be intimacy. It allows for individuals to kind of prepare mentally and emotionally for that activity. Whether or not you feel comfortable with scheduling that kind of things, a weekly date night may be a little bit more simple for some, or not. Kind of depends on your unique circumstances. But having something to look forward to, having something that is your activity that you do with your partner, is often absent from relationships that are stale and stuck, and is present, and in many cases is frequent in those that do not feel stale and stuck. So has anybody seen any examples of this in your own relationships or others, of consistent activities that seem to be working? Yeah.
Eating dinner together, just having
Yeah, that's a fairly simple one. I mean, you're going to eat anyway. Make sure you turn off the TV and sit down together and chat. Yeah, that's a good one. Any others? Okay. The next principle is intentionality. For those who aren't of the Judeo-Christian faiths, Buddhism has a similar kind of principle that they call right effort. And I love this principle because it's not just about doing something. It's about doing something for a purpose or a reason. But in Buddhism, they clarify you do it for a goal, but you're going to do it because it's the right thing whether or not you achieve that goal. In other words, yeah, I want to make this special dish for my partner, or I want to take my partner out, and I hope that's going to help break us out of this kind of rut that we're in. But even if it doesn't, it's still the right thing to do. It's still going to be good that I'm trying. And so what we notice in a lot of couples that, again, are feeling stale and stuck, not only is there no effort, but when they do effort, it's because they feel like they're just going through the motions. It's like this, I guess we have to be intimate together, or I guess we have to go to this activity together. I'm going to, pretend like everything is like hunky-dory as we're sitting at the table at this work party. They're there, they're putting in effort, but their heart's not into it, if that makes sense. So there's a couple of different thoughts that I just wanted to share with you really quickly. And again, I'd love to hear some of yours. I asked at this campfire with my in-laws how they try to be more intentional, and my sister-in-law shared that she and her husband, they've been married now over 20 years, they chose to sign up for a dance class together. And when I asked her why, she goes, because there's so many things that we have to do as a couple. This is one thing that we chose to do that was optional, and it became our thing. We were looking forward to it. And that's so true, right? I mean, so many of the things that we end up focusing on as a couple tends to be about getting the kids to school, or making sure the bills are paid, or who's going to take care of this or that. But there's not something that we are like getting to do, and no one's making us. And if you can find something like that, it can often help lift you out of a rut. I know couples who pick up new hobbies, and sometimes it's the hobby of the spouse that the other person's going to learn. Other times it's a brand new one. The couple learns how to play pickleball together, and then they join a pickleball league. So it's something that the two of them can go together. They leave the kids behind, and they're growing and have something to talk about other than kind of the mundane things that feel really stale. Some people will choose to get really crazy and like go on a mission together. Though interestingly, I had lunch with a guy who said that the church now has to, his calling in the church, he lives in Provo, is to go to the MTC and teach these couples who are going on missions like how to get along with each other. So simply going on a mission together may not be a great idea if you don't really like each other, because you're going to spend a lot of time with one another. But having said that, there are ways to get involved in the refugee center or the warming kitchens, and there's lots of different ways that couples could pick an activity that is their activity. Not their kids' activity, not a family thing, but something that they can look forward to, that they can talk about, that challenges and pushes them to grow about a new topic or a new activity. And if it's too hard, if that's like too complex and you need something more simple, reading a book. Picking a book as a couple that you don't have to read. You know, I'm not talking about your weekly, your daily scripture study or something like that. But, you know, pick a fun book, pick a thriller, pick a romance, pick something that you can then chat about. That's different than the normal mundane things that you normally talk about. Any other insights or examples of intentional activities that you've experienced? Yeah.
Vacations, of course, and they can be elaborate, or they can be road trips, or they can be finances that are an issue, they can be a staycation.
Yeah, thank you. Please.
My husband always sends me
What does he send you?
songs.
Oh, songs.
He'll hear something on the radio or Spotify or something. He'll be like, hey, this one you can listen to. And then we listen to the song and we're like, oh. And then, you know, if you're out and about and you hear a song, then I'll do the same for him. So it's our little way. And
Very cool.
we didn't see each other for 12 hours. But
Very cool. I love that one. Thank you. All right. The last one of my little acronym of SKIDS is diversity. Just like with cooking, you know, sometimes you want to have something different than the same meals you've had over and over and over again. And so spice it up. And in terms of, you know, Moses did this with Pharaoh, if you don't remember, you know, turning the Nile to blood didn't work, so he invited frogs and then lice and a bunch of other things. Not that you want to invite frogs or mice into your home, your house, but the principle is if you're not getting the results that you want, you need to try something different. There's an old phrase of insanity is doing the same thing and thinking you're going to get different results. And so spicing it up, if you already are going for a walk, go a different direction, you know, go an extra mile. Change your outfit, change your hairstyle. I mean, there's ways. I have another friend. You're going to wonder about my friends, but this other friend says, you know, if you're having a hard time arguing and it always gets bad, start arguing naked. It's really hard to get really mad with somebody when you're naked and they're naked. Or take it outside. You know, if your arguments are getting really destructive and you're really having a hard time connecting, go find a park bench, because it's really hard to yell and have your voice, you know, get loud in public. And so sometimes we got to do what we got to do. We have to have those difficult conversations, but if you can try to have them in a slightly different way, it can sometimes break the cycles. And somebody already said this. Let me just add this really quick. There's just a lot of value and appreciation. I'm not saying you should ignore your problems. We all have problems. In fact, when I used to do marriage counseling or premarital education with college kids, I would say when you pick your partner, you're also picking your problems, because we all have them. And part of the dating should be figuring out whether those problems are compatible with your problems. But at the end of the day, we got to have gratitude for the efforts that we're making. It's kind of what we learned about this morning, kind of loving ourselves and not beating ourselves up for not being enough, but also making sure that we are grateful for the things that our partner is doing. Even though we wish they were doing more, finding that gratitude can be really helpful. Dale Carnegie, American writer, once said, our fatigue is often caused not by work, but by our worry, our frustration, and resentment. And that reminds me of another quote of resentment is like being in a rocking chair. It keeps you busy, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And so if you really want to get out of your rut, out of a stale and stuck relationship, you got to do some work and be appreciative of when, you know, your efforts, you've been able to make a new effort, or your partner has as well. All right. I was asked to kind of review some research about what happens when people are in stale or stuck or contentious relationships. And so I'm going to do this by raising some questions and see if you guys have the answers. First of all, is thinking about divorce common? Now, without raising your hand, about how many of you have thought about divorcing your partner, what would be your guess? What % of Americans do you think about divorce within any given year? You think it's like 10%, 50%, 90%, 99%? Well, we've done a couple of studies up at USU, and one we focused on Utahns, and in Utah, in this study, we found that about 1 in 3 Utahns would admit, now I don't know how many really do, because, you know, it's self-report, consider divorce. Nationally, 1 in 4 admit, at least in this particular study, that in the last 6 months they've thought about divorce. But here's an interesting little finding. 90% of those who admit that they've had thoughts of divorce indicate that they are glad that they have stayed together over time. And so I think the take-home message for us and for those who you may be ministering to if you're here in a kind of leadership position is that it's not uncommon for divorce, to think about divorce. Just because someone's thinking about divorce does not mean that, it's the apocalypse is on the horizon and it needs to be over. Thoughts can change, they ebb and flow, and for many individuals over time, they learn how to figure it out and have a successful relationship. So I think I already answered that last part. Can unhappy marriages become happy again? Yes or no? What do you think? Yeah, they can. That's not to say that all will. Unless we have to be honest that there are some problems in marriages that quite honestly are very, very difficult to fix. That said, many unhappy marriages can recover. And in a different study, 2 out of 3 unhappily married couples indicated that over time they were now in a happy relationship with that same partner 5 years later. So keep that in mind as somebody comes to you wanting to know whether they should get divorced. Obviously, it's going to be their choice, but do let them know that a lot of people who are in that situation find that years later they're glad that they are still together. In terms of kids and outcomes for kids, we often get asked as researchers, will kids be better? Wouldn't kids be better if they were growing up in a home where there was more love, more attention, more nurturing? And the answer is, of course. I mean, we all thrive, just like a seed is going to do better in soil where there's fertilizer and there's water. And so statistically speaking, it is true that kids who are in homes where there is the lack of nurturing and support and love are at greater risk for a host of different problems. But that is a very broad general statement, and you have to understand that every child is going to respond to those conflicts and to divorce itself differently, and those results are not inevitable. And what I mean by that is there are so many other variables. Most importantly, of course, is the parenting and whether or not that parenting or the relationship between the parents which led to a divorce is contained or whether it spills over into conflict with children. And so an important thing, I think, as people talk about is divorce good or bad, is that divorce is usually a point on a journey. It is not the destination of someone's relationship. So a divorce between parents simply breaks the marriage, but it doesn't break the relationship that they're still co-parents to a child. And so if there is negativity and animosity and yelling and screaming before the divorce, well, it's not the divorce that messes up the kid. It's all that yelling and screaming and fighting and lack of love that they experienced in the home. And in many cases, the divorce actually frees the child from having to observe and be part of all that negativity. So we often talk about, to understand this principle a little bit better, differentiating between low conflict and high conflict marriages. So a high conflict marriage is where the conflict is obvious. It's where the parents literally are screaming and yelling and belittling and being openly critical to their partner in front of the children. There's not a good spirit in those homes, right? There's not a sense of love. In many cases, there's even violence in those situations. Whereas a low conflict is what many of us would refer to as kind of stale and stuck. It's not that it's bad, it's just not good. But the kids don't really know the difference in many of those cases. And so a divorce often kind of surprises them, and it throws them off, and it makes them wonder, well, wait a minute, I thought my parents were in love. I mean, I never see them fight. I guess I never see them say, I love you, but they're just there, right? They take me to school, and they cook me dinner. And wait a minute, now they saying that they're going to get divorced. What does that mean for me? Are they going to fall out of love with me? Are they going to divorce me? That's the kind of psychological kind of messing up that low conflict divorces leads to children. And so the key point here is, from a research perspective, if there is high conflict in a marriage, then yeah, you should be worried about what that's going to mean for child outcomes. If there's low conflict marriage, Children tend to be quite resilient, and they can grow up, and you don't see the same negative outcomes. But when they do get, their parents do get divorced, you see some of these kids just kind of wig out, because it kind of throws their whole world for a loop. How does divorce impact adult well-being? Well, it's just like with children. And there's no hard and fast rule. The research is pretty clear that in low conflict marriages, there is not a clear connection to more happiness. To the contrary, in low conflict marriages, you often see situations where individuals report lower personal well-being, whereas in high conflict marriages, usually you have a little bit more sense of empowerment, that you've chosen to break free, and particularly when there's violence, you obviously free yourself from that violence. And so the studies suggest, and this is the take-home message, is that in low conflict marriages, divorce is not necessarily a recipe or a guarantee that you're going to have happiness. Now, it may, but it may not. And so, if I were a betting person, which I'm not, because particularly with marriages and families, people do crazy and weird and unpredictable things. But if I had a low conflict marriage, I would invest in trying to fix that relationship and improve it, rather than hoping that another one might come along and be better. Whereas if I was in a high conflict marriage, I would certainly give it my all to fix it. But if it was really, really unhealthy, and there was violence, and there was all kinds of other crazy stuff, I would be having those conversations with my partner about whether or not divorce was in our best interest and the interest of our kids. And ultimately, those are conversations that people often have with their religious leaders, as well as through prayer, and it's a very personal decision. So let's talk a little bit about if you are one of those individuals that somebody comes to. They're struggling with this. They're trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. Are they high conflict, low conflict, in the middle? What does that mean for them? What does that mean for their kids? I love this little song. I'm the primary chorister in my church congregation right now, and so there's this great song about some must push and some must pull, and sometimes that's what we need to do. Sometimes our friends, people in our congregation, don't know what to do, and so they need us to give them a little bit of a push or to give a little bit of a pull. Having said that, obviously the first step is to listen, to be a good empathetic listener, and to try to understand where they're at. It's so easy to judge with very limited information, and if you can try to just bite your tongue and hear them out, often what people just need to hear is themselves talking about the solutions, and they can then identify which one is best without you telling them. The other reason why it's really important to just be a good listener is because there's always two sides to every story. And if you are the mother-in-law that's hearing this from your son, or you're a bishop and you're hearing it from the husband and not the wife, it's very easy to be like, wow, if what you're telling me is true, then that person is a jerk, and yeah, you shouldn't be with them or whatever. But there's always two sides to every story. And if you're going to be able to minister to the whole family, or if that divorce occurs and you're still going to be the mother-in-law or the grandparent to the shared child, you want to make sure that you're not picking sides or being viewed as picking sides. And then the third key principle in listening is to make sure that they own the decision. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who has to live with it. And so telling people what they need to do is a little dangerous, because if they don't, then they feel like they've left you down. If they do move forward with what you told them they need to do, and then it doesn't work out, then it's your fault for telling them to do this thing that didn't work out. And so the better option is just to really listen to them, help them process and brainstorm different options, and then be a support so that they can maybe have the time that they need to work things out, whether that be go to counseling, whether it be to have some alone time. So volunteer to babysit, plan double dates. And this is kind of the pushing and pulling analogy. You might push somebody, hey, go with your partner. I'll babysit, you guys go do stuff. And then they don't end up going. They sit around just watching TV instead. Sometimes you got to kind of pull them along with you and say, hey, I'm going to plan a date. We're going to get you out of the home. You guys are going to have some fun with us, whether you like it or not. We're going to go to this activity. We're going to play pickleball or whatever it might be. But try to get them out of the house sometimes can shake them out of that rut. Of course, being a good role model and then recommending good resources. If you're a clergy, I would say that almost the exact same things. I think having been a bishop in a congregation, I understand that you do feel and get inspiration for the people in your congregation and the people who are sitting in your room. But there's got to be a sense of humility and boundaries, I think even from an ecclesiastical perspective, that at the end of the day, you're not going home with those people. And so when they go home, they're going to live with the consequences of the decision to either stay or to go. And so you just got to be really careful about telling them that that's what they need to do from your perspective. Because if they end up following your direction, if that's what you're giving them, and it doesn't work out, you run the risk of them not only not owning it themselves, but also losing trust in you as well as the organization or the church that you represent. Sometimes we also are so busy as clergy and ecclesiastical leaders that we don't need more things, right? We don't need more activities to plan. And there's also been a big push, of course, to support what's going on in the home and to allow individuals to do things at home. And that's great. I think that's wonderful counsel for about half of the people. And then the other half don't know what to do in their home. They didn't see it growing up, or maybe they're so stale or stuck or discouraged that nothing's happening at the home. There's not dates going on. There's not these opportunities to enhance and grow their relationships. And so you might consider charging your activities committee or your elders quorum relief society if you're in the LDS faith, or if you're of different faith, whatever your adult ministry is, to plan a series of workshops and date nights, removing one of the obstacles so that individuals have something to do without having to plan it themselves or paying for it. Of course, facilitating learning is a great way to go. Thank you. I worked with a stake president who who created these totes that had articles on all kinds of topics, everything from finances to parenting to sexuality. And so when people would come to us as bishops and had these issues, rather than us trying to solve the problem for them, we gave them some good research, some good reading materials, and encouraged them to try to find answers for themselves as they studied some good principles. So you might consider that too, is come up with a resource library that you can recommend. Let me share a couple of these resources, and I think we're going to wrap up. Obviously, groups like Pause Wellness here, as well as many other therapists in the Valley, provide great resources. Some deal with couples who are, on the brink of divorce. Others really help individuals who have no intention of getting divorced, but just want to see their relationship improve, and they can help you with that as well. A couple of initiatives that are state funded that I'm involved with up at the university. One is called Healthy Relationships Utah. We provide free classes that people can come to. We have them for step families, for parents, for couples, and we even have some couple classes for self-improvement. These are free online, or we have them in person as well, anywhere from 4 to 8 hours, spread out over anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. So you got a built-in date night and an opportunity to learn some skills and to talk about these issues in more detail. The government here in Utah actually has a 25-year-old marriage commission, a group that focuses exclusively on trying to help marriages in Utah. That commission was assigned over to us at USU a couple of years ago, and we have a whole bunch of free resources that you're welcome to utilize and recommend to others. For example, we do a webinar series every other week. We have professionals, licensed therapists who will speak on topics from intimacy to shame to affairs to parenting to doing the dishes, dementia, everything. I think there's about 60 different webinars that are now archived. So if you're looking for that kind of simple, let's have something to talk about other than, the kids, watch one of these 30-minute webinars and chat about it together. We have a whole podcast series if that's more of your jam while you're driving away. I think we're up to 103 different episodes on all kinds of different topics. And for those taking picture, there's a brochure up here that has the QR code for all of these web pages. But topics on pretty much everything related to helping your marriage get stronger. We also have a whole series of e-courses. I think we're up to about 100 now on a variety of different topics, everything from what we call technoference, how phones and computers and stuff get in the way of our romance, to parenting and all kinds of other issues. There's actually a course in development, and hopefully it will go live in January. That's actually called Stale and Stuck. It's about an 8-hour course that goes into much more detail for individuals in that situation. And then there's a whole bunch of other resources. I brought some of them here. We have a marriage handbook. We actually have a course in development around people who are thinking about divorce. So lots of free courses, lots of free resources. Feel free to encourage people in your congregations or your neighborhoods. And you're welcome to take as many of these as you want so I don't have to take them back to my office. And with that, I'll end. And I think there's a couple minutes for questions. 2 minutes for questions? All right. Any insights that I missed that you think would be helpful for the others to hear? Yeah.
I'm just curious, with high conflict marriage, I understand that there's not all these like physical abuse, but I know of a lot of situations where there's been a lot of mental or emotional abuse.
Yeah.
Does that like fall in that category of high?
Yeah, high conflict.
conflict?
Yeah. That's an excellent question. For the kids, if the kids are not aware of it, you still see kind of the adverse effects to divorce because it kind of comes out of the blue. When it's very in their front, often individuals who are engaged that with their partner are doing it with their kids too. So they're demeaning their kids, right? I mean, they're telling their kids that they're fat or failures or ugly or how come you're no good for anything. And so for those who are kind of pro-marriage, I'm sorry to say this, but the reality is in those situations, kids actually end up doing a little bit better when they are removed from that constant negativity. But if it's kind of behind closed doors and it's just between the couple, then you see the opposite. It kind of messes the kids up. Any other observations, thoughts, insights?
I just found out this week, the friend who lived in Las Vegas, and I just found out the friend got blew us out of the water. Like, oh my goodness, how can you best support? I mean, of course, you're curious. You want to know what happened. Or how do you best support people that are going through divorce to ask what happened? Do you just say, I'm here to talk with you? Like, how do you approach people that are going through that where you're supportive but not,
You just nailed it. I mean, just letting them know that you're there. I like to ask the question, hey, do you want to talk about this? Because if you do, I'm happy to listen. And often as part of that discussion, then it becomes clear whether or not they're really looking for advice or whether they don't want your advice. And so starting just with, hey, you want to talk? I'm here for you. If you do, is a great way to start.